Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos ao segundo episódio do Conexão IBDiC, o podcast oficial do Instituto Brasileiro de Direito da Construção. Eu sou André Choma, sou engenheiro, sou consultor, também host do Capital Projects Podcast e pai da Gabriela.
Eu sou Leonardo Toledo, advogado, professor e árbitro, ex-presidente do IBDiC, um entusiasta do direito da construção, pai da Elisinha, do Chico e da Cecilinha.
Eu sou Vitor Madeira Filho, sou advogado, árbitro, membro de Dispute Boards, ex-presidente do IBDiC, representante do DRPF do Brasil, e estou muito feliz aqui com a participação nesse mais um incrível episódio do Conexão IBDiC.
O Conexão IBDiC é um programa dedicado a todos os profissionais do direito da construção, mas que também reúne juristas, engenheiros, consultores, profissionais das mais diversas áreas, trazendo temas relevantes para a discussão que afetam não apenas o direito da construção, mas também toda a cadeia.
Bom, para quem não conhece ainda o Conexão IBDiC, é esse fórum que a gente criou aqui de discussão. Foi uma ideia aqui do nosso presidente Marcelo Monteiro de Mesquita, exatamente para que a gente traga as principais referências do direito da construção no Brasil e no mundo, para a gente aprender um pouco mais, né, sobre o direito da construção e ter não só um entendimento sobre direito, mas também sobre como é a carreira e a vida desses profissionais.
O Conexão IBDiC ele vai acontecer mensalmente e é importante que todos já comecem a seguir nossos episódios, nossas plataformas no Spotify e no YouTube. Nós teremos hoje uma discussão de um tema de alta relevância. Eu sou um pouco bias, né? Sou um pouco suspeito para falar, mas nós vamos falar de modelagens colaborativas e trouxemos uma representante internacional com grande expertise em contratos colaborativos para discutir sobre um tema que muito se fala e pouco se sabe. Então, acho que eu já tive a oportunidade de discutir com a Andrea Chao. So, Andrea Chao, thanks a lot for coming to this episode, the second episode of our podcast. Andrea Chao is a partner at Bird Bird. She's specialized in construction and procurement law. Andrea is the chair of the FIDIC Task Group 17, which is responsible for developing a new international collaborative contract model to complement the FIDIC suite. She also co-authored a specific model in Netherlands, right?
Yep.
For collaborative contracting. I wouldn't be able to say the name. I don't even try. Then you can do it. So thanks a lot, Andrea, for joining us today. And I can say that you are already a friend because we've met so many times by now. And apart from a friend, she's very good to talk to about collaborative contracts and projects as well.
Thank you, Leonardo.
Welcome.
Então vamos para a nossa conversa. Solta a vinheta.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be with you here, and we are a fan from your work, and you are helping a lot the market with your ideas and developing new ways to make contracts, especially in this litigious world of construction. And we know that you have an inspiring career. We want to know how it was this career, how you are here, and how do you inspire other women to, as a construction lawyer in an environment, so male environment as construction. So tell me a little bit about this.
That's actually a very interesting question. So I started off as a lawyer when I was just 22. So I was admitted to the bar when I was like 22 in a month or something, you know. And then, you know, you start off and you go into construction projects and you need to tell people, men, who are like double your age, sometimes triple your age, yeah, what you're doing is not the right way. You know, so that really builds quickly on your experience and on your way of explaining how certain things can work, but also pitfalls, etc. And what I've learned throughout the years when it comes to engineers, when it comes to contractors, is you can speak about facts. People are solution oriented. In the end of the day, people want to build something. So we all have the same goal. So that in the end, knowing that it was in the end all about that. And of course, they first look at you and think, woman, young, blah, 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 blah. At a certain moment, they get over themselves. And now I'm at that age that I'm not so young anymore, and that there are more women. So it definitely becomes easier. And sometimes it can even help. So yeah, that's.
But Andrea, what was your career path? How you always wanted to study law?
No.
And tell us a bit of that story. That I know.
I wanted to be a civil engineer.
Civil engineer.
I wanted to be civil engineer. I wanted to design bridges. I just love highways and bridges. I wanted to design these. But I was also very lazy at secondary school. I was very lazy at mathematics, and I always managed to wing it. And just go to these tests and just succeed until I couldn't anymore. And by then it was too late. So then you need to do something else. Well, and what's the other route to be involved with these types of construction projects? Yeah, that's doing law.
So when you started law, you had already an idea of the kind of environment that would attract you?
Yes, definitely.
That's
Yeah.
that's not normal, right? For at what age do you make that choice when you're?
It was around 14 that we were going on holidays to Germany, and you had these beautiful bridges, over these taalbroeken, etc. I was like, oh man, I want. But in Holland we don't have mountains and stuff, so there are no taalbroeken to build. But okay, so it was about that age, but. Yeah.
That age, and then you already studied law, thinking that you would be interested, involved somehow with the construction.
Well, and in my first year, I got in contact with procurement law, and I thought, "Whoa, that is and that was so fascinating. The whole idea of a procurement process being a way to, let's say, curtail the government in deciding how it wants to give certain work. So. It is not just, you're my friend, let me give you this work. No, I need to build a market. I need to create competition. How do I do that? Well, through procurement, and that justifies my decision. And that seeing that as a way to bind procurement authorities, that was actually fascinating. And then,
And the idea first was more into public procurement.
Yeah.
That difference makes a lot of sense there.
Yes, it's a combination, of course. You see quite often public procurement law expertise with construction law expertise, because the biggest projects being procured are construction. So you see it a lot. And then at a certain moment, I ended up at construction law firms, and then ended up doing construction law, and
But it's interesting that in Brazil, for example, a construction lawyer, of course, would also deal. Some of the construction lawyers will deal with the public procurement, but there's a more clear distinction between private procurement and public procurement in a way that you cannot not that you cannot, but you shouldn't do both.
Yeah.
Because when you do both, sometimes you are not deep
specialized
in any of them.
Yeah.
But when you think of construction lawyers here, I would say that we are a bit more into public, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean private.
Private, because I think in Brazil you are when you deal with public works, you deal with contracts that are non-negotiable. So you don't need so much so you need in the bid phase, but it's difficult to really negotiate a contract or make a concrete from scratch. And we don't use in the private sector so much the standard forms, which is something that we also want to discuss with you later. But that's why you need so much the lawyers to be specialized, to know how to build a bespoke contract in Brazil. And this is why the construction law firms can support the private sector more than in the public sector.
That's very interesting. So, I mean, it's one thing that contracting authorities say it is not negotiable, but is it truly not negotiable?
Truly,
Do they have enough appetite from the market that they can still dictate terms?
It's a long story. It's a long story
But we have
because
2 hours.
there's
don't we?
sort of a very, let's say, complicated to say the least scenario for public procurement in Brazil right now. So all the contractors are having a lot of difficulty to work with public authorities. Except for PPPs, or this is different, it's another model. But when you think of a direct contract, public contract, which is not a public company, then you'd say that you need a lot of courage to work and to be successful.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, but tell us a bit more about your career in a way that I remember that you had another you were in a different law firm for a while and you always wanted to be a lawyer and since the beginning and how a bit of that idea until you became a partner. Very important partner.
So it was in my first year that I decided that I want to become a lawyer, so not a judge or something else, but a lawyer, and that I decided I want to become a lawyer and a partner. And that was at a visit to a law firm in Brussels. And I still remember that we had a little trip with the Students Association, and I still remember everybody was like, wasted from the days before. And we had a visit at this law firm, and there was this partner, a competition law partner, who started to speak about a dawn rate. And this is I think 2003, 2004 somewhere that he spoke about this, because this shouldn't happen anymore. And he spoke about how he came at the dawn rate to his client to help his client, and the client had decided that it was a good idea to take all the papers they had, put them in the courtyard, and start to build a bonfire. So, and he was speaking about that for like an hour, and everybody was like dozing off, and I was like sitting literally on the tip of my chair, listening to this so much interest, because it's fascinating. I mean, I just saw it in front of me, the flames, etc. And then I thought, no, I want to do this. I want to be a lawyer. I mean, did you get to do these type of things? And then quite quickly on came procurement law, etc. During my studies, I worked as a PSL, like 1-2 days a week at law firms. So I got to see a niche law firm. I worked at the largest Dutch firm, and then I worked at one of the largest international firms. And that's when I decided I want to work at an international firm, because the level of cooperation that you have with these types of firms, the type of projects, it's just unprecedented. So, and then I looked at, okay, who are the construction lawyers I know? Who are the construction lawyers that are respected? Who would I want to work for? What do I want to learn the trade from? And that's how I ended up, sending some letters to some firms, and I had a conversation with our joint good friend Arend van Wassenaar, and that was not an interview.
Do you remember Arend too? Arend was here in the last IBDiC conference.
Yeah, this is, and he's amazing. He's amazing, and that was just, it was a conversation, and I left so enthusiastic about that conversation. I was like, yes, I want to work with him, and then I got the offer, and it was said, well, and he can also be formally your patron, and I was like, come on, nothing can beat this. So I started off in his team, also did a lot of PPP projects, switched to corporate, came back. And during those years, I did a lot of PPP projects in the way how we approached them in Holland, which was quite similar to the way how it was approached in the UK. Harsh. FIDIC Silver Book, harsh. A lot of risks, which also cannot be managed to the contractor. A lot of soil-related risks that cannot be assessed upfront to the contractor, yet you want a fixed price. And what we saw happening was, in relation to these projects, especially those which were put on the market during the crisis, contractors needed to survive, so they just bid low. And you saw that happening during these procurements, that at the end of these procurements, they just put their hand in front of their eyes, thought these risks will not materialize, bam, reduce margin.
And do
margin,
exactly
margin.
like praying, right? Praying.
Yeah.
Exactly. You pray to God, hope that's your risk insurance. And that it doesn't work like that. It
Does
doesn't
not.
work. I mean, these risks will occur. They deserve a price. You need to. So there were definitely some successful PPPs, but there were also some that brought some contractors to the brink of insolvency, or that were just, that needed to be resolved in the end through mediation and settlement letters, etc. And that is not how you would want it to see. So at a certain moment, these large contractors said, we're getting out of this. We can't do this. I mean, this is the future of our company that's at the line here. We can't do this anymore. And that was about 2017, 18, 19, a bit like that. And from that moment on, I started to think, okay, but wait a minute. What I'm seeing happening with these PPP projects, and that's also, what Arend has always said, people are not talking with each other. Yeah, you have an issue? Okay, send me a letter. Send me a claim letter. Formal. We're scared. We're scared also as a result of the building fraud we had, like about a decade before, a bit longer before. So there was a lot of fear within the sector to speak with each other. But that was not creating the results that you wanted. So at a certain moment, I started thinking, this doesn't work. And at that moment, I already switched firms. I switched to another firm, which, just did not have the same reputation on PPP. So I tried to build that reputation. So this came as a way to take a leap forward to start to build on the collaborative model. And what I then started to do is, together with a couple of project managers, created an early contractor involvement model, DG 2020. Duurzaam gebouwd, 2020. Aha. So,
My guess.
and we did it pro bono. We put it out online, free of charge. No registration, whatever. Everybody can just download the PDF. We later on also translated it in English. And we've always said to each other, if there is one person opening that PDF and being inspired to think about early contractor involvement, then it's a great success for us. 4 years down the line, billions of euros have been procured using that model. Hundreds, if not more, projects in Holland, outside of Holland. We translated it into English. I've been using it throughout Europe on projects. It has inspired also in some Asian countries. It has, given me the platform to become active within FIDIC. At a certain moment, I got the opportunity to join as a partner at my current firm. So I took that step, took this work with me, this approach. And we decided, we've now had 5 years of using this model. Let's revamp it. So mid-May this year, we launched the new version of the ECI contract, which has a lot of best practices from Holland, from Poland, from Germany, from all over the place. We're now nearly finalizing the translation of it. I just need to sign off of a few last people. And then also the English version is launched. And it's again getting a lot of good response. It is just a very positive way to contribute to the market. And I must confess, when I told this to my fellow project managers, they were like, Andrea, you're crazy. But I told them, when we launched that ECI model contract, I told them, I know my fellow lawyers, they will rip it apart. Because we as lawyers, we are not, friendly towards each other. We're not supportive. We pinpoint the holes. We don't help.
See, Victor,
and you need that also. But what we did is, before we developed both the first version and the second version, we had a consultation process. So we put out a consultation version and asked the market, hey, here's our email address, let us know. And we got many, many responses. First time around, not so many of lawyers. Second time around, actually, they did. First time around, we got all the nasty blogs of the lawyers saying, this doesn't work and that doesn't work. But parties started to use it. Parties started to use it on multi-100 million euro project programs, on large-scale grid connection programs, on hydrogen projects. This model was used for projects of a size which we never intended it to be. So then at a certain moment, the critique just stopped. And it's very funny because now I'm sometimes being called or being emailed by the people who wrote these blogs and said, "Oh, do you have that English version for me?" Okay, and I'm like, of course I have that for you. I'm happy that you're using that, and I'm happy that
writing your blog.
Yeah, put it in.
And then sometimes I will check, hey, this person who's sending me this email, hey, where's the blog? And then you see it's taken offline. In Dutch we have a saying, de aanhouder wins. The person who has grit, they will win. And it's positive, and that's what's nice about it. It's just positive.
You were consistent, right? You kept going, kept believing in that.
With the support, especially of the project managers involved, because
And
they were like,
you were seeing results.
Yes.
As well, of course.
Yes.
That drives a lot of behavior.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, I don't need to explain that to you. Collaborative contracting is not, I have it in a contract, now it's done. It's hard work. But it's a basis. It's a starting point. It's a positive starting point. And then you need to work at it. So quite a few of these projects, don't have the success that you expect. Mm-hmm. And we have done some non-academic analysis why that is. And we've seen a few reasons why that is and why sometimes the projects fail. And with fail, I mean that after the ECI phase, you do not continue to the construction phase, but you say, hey guys, thank you for the efforts. We're going back to the market.
And you had the chance to work in an academic background on those. I don't know the academic side of your. If you did follow any of this.
I don't have a PhD like you have. But every now and then I will write an academic article. And then I will always tell myself, why did I do this? This is so absolutely horrible. Literally, the birth of my kids was less horrible than preparing this academic article. And then afterwards, I'm happy that I did that after a couple of months. And
you look at the.
True.
It's good that you put the words for your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So thinking of, let's talk a bit about collaborative contracting a little bit more, because maybe, Andrea, I would like you to explain to our audience what is a collaborative model in your view, and are collaborative models a reality that has to be dealt with, and if not, or to some extent not, what is still missing for it to be more widely adopted?
Good questions. So what is a collaborative contract? Well, a collaborative contract is a contract that is first and foremost focused on creating relationships between parties, fostering relationships. It is a type of contract that, from the definition that I've created for FIDIC, because there wasn't really a broad definition yet. It is a contract that also involves the contractor already during the pre-construction phase. That's an element you actually always see, to tap into the brains and the added benefit of the contractor. Sometimes it also involves the other phases in addition to the construction phase, so sometimes also the O&M phase, sometimes also the decommissioning phase. It is a contract that allows for joint risk management, joint decision making in whatever shape or form. There are different shapes and forms in how you can do that. That holds a collection of collaborative measures that foster the aforementioned topics. So topics like early warning, so have early warning options in it, risk management, risk registers, etc. And quite importantly, a collaborative contract is a contract that is geared towards reasonable outcomes. So when we prepare a contract, we of course intended to have a reasonable outcome, but sometimes a contract has an unintended outcome. Well, we feel that in a collaborative contract, the outcome should never be an unreasonable outcome. So even there should be a safety valve, so to speak. This is all not new. The oldest project I could find, and surely that is not the oldest project, but the oldest project I could find is a project from 1953 in Holland. Shortly after the Second World War, we had a boom in population. We didn't have that many houses, Second World War, etc. So we needed to build houses quickly. No room for blame game or whatever. This is wrong, that is wrong. It needs to be done quickly, and the first time around, it needs to be done adequately. So that is where we start to see early contractor involvement for the first time in any case in Holland. And that since then it has never left.
1951, you said?
1953.
Interesting.
Yes.
I would love to see that.
And in the 90s, the first big model, ECI model, was launched in Holland, which was the standard until we launched our DG 2020 in 2020. And it, like I said, it has some influxes, moments where it was heavily used, some moments where it was less heavily used. So in that PPP period, the post building fraud periods, it was less used because it does require communication between parties. But it is an approach that has worked. It is an approach that has also been put out for tender using, in any case, EU procurement law rules, which are quite strict. And it has upheld there. And well, the question is how academic this is, of course, as a way to test whether it works or not. But if I look at case law and we compare, let's say, linear contracts compared to collaborative contracts, in Holland, in any case, we have tens of thousands, if not more, court cases and arbitration cases which have been published on linear projects. And we have, well, I think surely less than 50 at this moment on collaborative contracts. That must mean something.
For sure.
And if I then look at the projects that I was also involved in, whatever shape or form, which failed, what do I see happening there? Is that parties at a certain moment agree that the contractor wants too much money and the employer doesn't have it. But because there is still that no-go at the end of the early contractor involvement phase, because there is a no-go before you go towards the construction phase, they can all both leave without harm. Of course, nobody's happy with it, that there was a delay. The contractor, wanted to do the construction work, isn't doing the construction work. Even going back to the market does not tend to be cheaper because new prices, etc., and the market knows, hey, there's something going on. But still, you have a way out, which is not through a court. What we are noticing, if you look at research being done in the form of interviews, people say collaborative contracts foster understanding. It fosters an understanding of the project and of each other's goals. It allows for an employer to understand, hey, it is not bad that the contractor wants to make money. He needs to make money. It allows for the contractor to understand why exactly the employer wants this project and what their key focus is. Is it price, quality, speed, certain sustainability requirements, blah, 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 blah. Because it can never be all. So that is the nice thing about it. And this is also quite a lot of these things that I've now spoken about. We are implementing that in that FIDIC model. Nothing is new. The combination is new. The putting it in FIDIC wording and in a FIDIC look and feel, which is very smart. That is new, but it's all been tried and tested. There's nothing new, truly.
And Andrea, I thought a lot about these models and why in some places this works and others sometimes there's not that doesn't work, but sometimes has so many challenges to work. Do you think there's any relation with the society, the development of the society, of a cultural issue that reflects the success or not of this model?
I love this question. I've thought about this a lot. I will tell you what my gut tells me, which, has zero value. But I've been doing projects in Holland, in Belgium, in Germany, in Poland, the Nordics, Iceland, whatever, and a lot of countries around it, and also some countries outside of Europe. And nowadays parties come to me and ask, help us with this collaborative approach because we need a collaborative approach. Sometimes I'll be the first in a country to start to implement it. And I always notice the same things. I notice the same trends happening. And taking one step back, Holland is a country full of negotiators. We are traders. First of all, and secondly, well, you perhaps know the word polderen. So a lot of Holland is under sea level. But we started our land reclamation about 500 years ago. But you could only reclaim land if you were working together with your fellow neighbors, with your neighbors to build joint dikes, have your windmill to pump out water, etc. You need to work together to create that polder, to create that area where the land is reclaimed. So that's where our verb polderen comes from. And that word means effectively so much as broad negotiations with multiple parties at the same time. That is how our society, ended up being. That's also from a political perspective. Used to be, now perhaps less, but it used to be a very important element. So it is definitely ingrained in our culture. We're comfortable with negotiating. But if I look at the different countries, I see the same things happening everywhere at different moments. I see happening a form of fraud. There are a lot of countries where you see that there is collusion between authorities and contractors. Then you see with a lot of countries that at a certain moment that stopped. In some countries, penalties are given. Some countries, like Brazil, I understand, people end up in jail. So there is that shock. And then what you see is people become very fearful and take upon themselves a more traditional approach. Hey, this is your problem, this is my problem. Your problem will not become my problem, period. Which does not work with construction projects, because if halfway a project, the contractor gets a problem, it will be the employer's problem, whether you like it or not, because the contractor does not have an open-ended budget. It doesn't have a shareholder who will just continue to pay. It needs to make money, and otherwise it will go bankrupt. So at the end, it's always also the employer's problem, whether they like it or not, whether you put it in your contract or not. Because otherwise, what you have is an insolvent contractor, which also does not give you the assets that you want. Sometimes I'll have clients who say, we want to have uncapped liability or very, very high liquidated damages. And I ask them, do you want them to go bankrupt? No. Okay, why didn't ask it? You want to give them an incentive to not do something, but so you see, I've seen a lot of countries that building fraud taking place, parties returning a very traditional approaches, and what I then see is contractors, hitting their max of what they can take, and then saying, we're not doing this anymore, and becoming more risk averse, and then you need to do something else, and that is the moment that collaborative contracting comes in, and every country is somewhere else in that spectrum. But if you, at a certain moment, do not get good bids anymore, which are too high, you have too few bids, or you are left with cowboys who are just absolutely excellent at claiming and contract management and not at building, then you need to start doing something else. And that's I strongly believe that every country is in that phase. And if I then look at concrete projects, well, the first project that you do in such a country, the first negotiations that you have with the lawyers on the other side and with the contracts on the side, they will always respond with 1,000 questions. They're, well, I wouldn't say taken aback, but they're like, why are you changing this in the FIDIC contract? Or why are you doing that? Or why are you doing that? So very, very almost aggressive in their response. It's always the same. And then you start to explain. And then you start to have that conversation. But if you want this, and this differently, we can do that because our goal is ABC, and what you propose actually helps our goal, so we will change that. And that way, through that public procurement process or private procurement process, you start to create that rapport, and you start to create that relationship with the contractor. And I, as a lawyer, can contribute to that, and I can create that rapport with their lawyer. And then with all these negotiations, at a certain moment, bam, it flips. And then you end up with a situation that the other lawyer and the other party will actually say, hey, the contract, it has this. This is actually incorrect. It is in your benefit, employer, to change this and this and this. And then I'm like, that's when I know I've done my work well. if I've managed to turn around that skepsis to people starting to embrace it by just being trustworthy. And that's what I like about public procurements, because it's also a way to not just curtail the government, but also build relationships if you do it well. So when you said, Victor, oh yeah, it's take it or leave it, I'm like, oh man, it's such a lost opportunity, gosh.
Please go on.
Is it possible for a collaborative contract to lose its collaborative approach during execution in case of conflicts, practically or legally? Is it possible to change? I mean, people are not that used to embark in a new approach, and during construction, some conflicts may arise. Do you see any time this approach should be broken during execution? Does it happen? Can it happen?
Yes, it is actually proven that can be the case, that this is a concrete risk, and I'll explain why. So if you adopt early contractor involvement, then you have another contract typically for the construction phase.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that can be, I don't know, FIDIC green book, red book, yellow book, whatever, the local equivalent of it, whatever. What we are seeing is if you have an early contractor involvement and you continue with, let's say, a linear traditional contract, although I must say that the new FIDIC suite, the new FIDIC Rainbow suite definitely already has taken steps towards becoming more collaborative with early warning, etc. But still, if you combine that with a more linear approach, then you do not change that joint risk management, the early warnings, etc. in that second contract, in the construction contract, then you exactly run the risk that parties move back into their traditional approaches. And if you then combine that, and again, this is based on studies, if you then combine that with no longer working at the same location, but both working in your own head offices, etc., no longer having frequent meetings, starting to say, hey, yes, send me a claim letter, then you fall back in traditional behavior, and then you lose that element.
Mm-hmm.
So you have de-risked the project, but you haven't then reaped all the benefits that there are.
Yeah. I don't know if you experienced that. Well, I've been talking about collaborative contracting in Brazil. I mean, my PhD I finished in 2014.
On alliancing.
So you kind of become a bit cynical for many things, because you see waves coming and going, and you see like the wheel make all the turn and coming back to the same point. And I felt when I started discussing alliance about in 2006, something like that, a first wave that came with some movements around all that noise that came from the North Shore alliances and the North Sea alliances on oil and gas, and Australia came with some benchmark. And then there was lots of misunderstandings of how to implement it. And but there was this first wave that came with a little bit of distrust. Was it successful, not successful? But what I keep seeing renewed is the reality coming to the door and knocking the door and say, I don't know if that worked, but what I'm doing now, standard approach, definitely is not working. And then like the same group, like the same economic group, sometimes come with a different wave to my door and saying, different people, not knowing that they already tried to do that movement. And for example, now we can see a wave that's connected to the loss of strength of the contractor side. In Brazil, we had a very important and let's say economic strength of the contractor side. So we had Odebrecht, Camargo, Andrade. They were all very important in terms of delivering an APC lump sum.
Mm-hmm.
And now everybody's a bit of risk averse, and they don't want only to take risk. So everybody's trying to look some way around. that's the kind of wave that I'm seeing for the third time in terms of movements towards collaborative model. Do you see anything similar in the countries that you worked?
Yeah, well, a few things. First of all, you said, hey, but it's not like linear contracts are all that. That question is raised not often enough. When I speak about collaborative contracts, it's always, hey, but where has collaborative contracts proven to work this, that? And I'm like, wait a minute, but if I look at studies on EPC contracts, oh man, these are not good. The budget overruns that you know the USO has shown in their, the OECD has shown in their research, to the extent they have big data available, it is not good for EPC contracts. They have a lot of cost overruns and overall are more expensive quite often than design bid build type of approaches, etc., etc. So if you want to question collaborative contracts, you know, academically sound is then to also question in the same level the current more traditional linear approaches. Then you need to look at everything, and that's fair. Secondly, there are a lot of projects where linear contracts work. Simple EPC projects,
Exactly.
logistics, etc. You know, don't change a winning formula. It works. Everybody's happy with it.
The risk is quite understood.
Exactly. You know, how deep does a solar panel foundation go? Like 50 centimeters, meter max. You know, that what will you hit? You know, it's a completely different ballgame than when you're dealing with complex waste to energy projects. There you need to have a different approach. Yeah, and when it comes to waves, I mean, you were looking at alliancing. From my perspective, alliancing is the ultimate form of collaboration, is the purest form of a collaborative contract out there. It is, I tend to say, like 2.0.
That was the first wave. It changed a lot.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. We got the task from FIDIC, prepare a collaborative contract. Period. What type of collaborative contract? So like the definition I gave earlier, it's quite a wide definition. It can adopt just ECI. It can also adopt alliancing. It can adopt, you know, a whole range of type of collaborations. One thing that I advocated for since the beginning is looking at the product innovation curve, which you perhaps know. So you have a product innovation curve, you have the innovators, the first like couple of percent, then you have the early adopters, then you have big majority 1, big majority 2, of which I always forget the names and blah, 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 and then laggards. So me adopting, you know, new technology, I'm like at the end of things. But me looking at these types of contracts, I'm at the forefront. And what we have always said is the FIDIC platform, it's an excellent platform to provide people with a tool who otherwise would not be using that tool. And from the experience that I've gained, and also the people from my task group have gained, is people who want to adopt alliancing, they don't need a model. They are already that willing to look and invest in contracts and look at that and explore it. They don't need a model. There are perhaps a few who would say, oh yes, if that model is available, I'll use it, and otherwise I won't do an alliancing contract. But most of them will find an alliancing contract. Most of them will call you and say, hey, Leonardo, give me an alliancing contract. We want to make an impact. We want to help parties consider collaborative contracting where without a FIDIC model, they would not be considering that. So that means that that collaborative model is not as pure in its collaboration as an alliancing contract. It is based, inspired by FIDIC Green Book and made more collaborative. These tools have been added. On some points, the somewhat one-sidedness has been changed. The role of the engineer has been changed, has been made more neutral. The joint decision-making has been introduced. A broader role of the DAB has been introduced. Early warnings have been extended. But it's all still quite recognizably FIDIC. And it is not, I mean, you saw the draft, of course. You signed an NDA, so you can't say anything about it. But you will.
Yes, I did.
You will see it was not an alliancing contract.
Yeah, no.
It's a bilateral contract, which requires the usage of aligned subcontracts and contracts with the engineer.
Maybe you could
Yeah.
explain a little bit of, because this is a very important part of the approach that the FIDIC has chosen, which is not a multi-party contract for the collaborative contracts. It's a bilateral, but with some ways to make a joint collaboration between Can you explain a bit of it?
So the funny thing is, to create this, I actually drew from the PPP experience. So the PPP contracts, as I know them, have a lot of clauses in it stating you, contractor, will ensure that your subcontractor will do ABC. That is a contractual obligation between the employer and the contractor. Subcontractor is not bound by it because he doesn't sign that contract. But if the contractor does not subcontract those terms, then the contractor is liable towards the employer. That approach, that flow down obligation approach, is what we included in this draft. And what we will also be preparing is to match it, because people are lazy. So if you don't give them a template, they'll just use their own template. We'll give them a template subcontract, which matches those requirements, and we'll give them a template advisory contract to match
It's
those.
quite smart. It's interesting.
And we are now considering whether we should also not have a multi-party integrator somehow, some shape or
I
form.
wonder how was the meetings with David and all the... Because there are lots of benchmarks on collaboration, right? The Australian, as you said.
Yeah.
And I've been talking to them. They have changed a lot as well.
Yeah.
And in UK, that we have been there, and US, which has their own ECI and integrated project delivery approach.
Mm-hmm.
How was possible? You're a hero. She's my hero, because how was possible to manage all those visions? Because, well, I've been trying to study collaboration around different places in the world, and anywhere you go, they will say, no, come to Papa. I can tell you,
He's the best.
this is the label.
And I will make it even worse. I had decided up front, because sometimes I decide things. Most of the time I do things jointly, but sometimes I'll decide and oppose. I've opposed on my task group that we make all decisions unanimously. I'm not doing voting. Everybody needs to stand behind the product, period. And I will just talk to them until, we find a solution. And that's the same with negotiations, as long as you continue talking, as long as you don't...
A lot of talking, right?
A lot of talking. And, I've managed to also, if I look at, former cases I did, I've managed to reach settlements on projects where no settlement should have been reached by just talking. Hours, until someone's just tired, I guess, But people want to be heard. And that is something I believe applies in every culture. People want to be heard. And once they think, okay, you've understood my issue, you thought about it, and I understand why a certain solution comes out of it, at a certain moment, people will say, okay, we need to come to a win-win. You are also giving me something that I need. You are taking my interests into account. And that's how we've also structured that FIDIC model. It starts with the clause on definitions. And then we don't go into the employer, contractor, engineer definitions. No, then we go towards what do we do together? Collaborative clauses, the joint interest clauses, also the individual interest clauses. We look at all those elements to allow that same conversation, to allow people to have endless conversations, to come to unanimous decisions if desired.
That's interesting.
I read an article from you talking about the use of collaborative contracts in data centers. We in Brazil here, we are now having an increase of these types of projects. I want to tell a little bit to the audience, at least, why do you recommend the use of this type of contract in these projects?
The first few data centers I did were just on a traditional FIDIC basis. Not too many changes, etc. Quite recently, I noticed a couple of changes. The market was saying, the marketers and contractors saying, well, we're not doing that anymore. We want contracts with a more balanced risk approach. We see risks here, there, etc., especially when you're dealing with further developments of live data centers, which is quite risky. And what I'm noticing is that, especially with data centers, there are at this moment a lot of supply chain issues, especially when it comes to the elements of certain supplies for the energy supply to these data centers. So certain transformers, etc., they have very long lead times. So that can be quite challenging. And for these data centers, there is often a lot of optimization that can still take place. And of course, FIDIC Yellow Book has an optimization clause. But if you add an ECI phase up front, you have so much more optimizations that can take place. So that is why nowadays, when I deal with data centers, I tend to use an ECI plus a different type of contract after that, simply because both parties want that.
And remember that your firm is very into construction of data centers, right?
Yes.
I remember that your partner that I met saying that they are very specialized in data centers. Their construction team is quite interesting, because when we were talking to them saying that we are a construction lawyer and say we are construction, and at least in London,
Yep.
we're very
Yes.
focused in data centers.
Yeah.
So they will be talking about a bit of Brazil, because we are having a lot of investment.
I understand that, yes, and especially if you get to the hyperscalers and the AI type of data centers, etc., then you get to unprecedented eras, and then the costs increase so much, and then to make a data center financially viable, well, you need to see where you can decrease costs.
And when it comes to dispute resolution in these types of contracts, what do you recommend? What are the standards? I know that you don't want disputes,
Yes, sometimes
but
things
it
happen.
happens. What dispute boards are a way to find a balance here, to have a way out without going to courts, and how do you see that?
I mean, wasn't it in December that King's College launched the research on the successfulness on dispute boards, which is also, I must say, aligned with what I see happening, although I understand that Brazil tends to have a specific approach towards dispute boards and the bindingness of their outcomes, but that's a different topic, I guess. But what I see is that dispute boards as such, they tend to have people in them who are reputable. And I would expect that, considering that you're dealing with professional parties who can be convinced with facts. I know that often with disputes, it sometimes does not appear like that, but I've also managed to resolve disputes by saying, let's just agree not to look at the legal aspects. Let's first look at the technical aspects, and then at a certain moment, the solution will follow from that. What I've noticed, and perhaps that's also because I haven't been involved in that many disputes, so I'm perhaps a bit naive in this. But with the disputes I've done with contractors, where we ended up proving independently with a technical expert who was also paid by the contractor, sorry contractor, but you're the one who made the technical mistake. What I've seen with these types of processes is that at that moment, the shame that comes upon the contractor is so much, then you don't have that legal discussion anymore. Or maybe you have a bit of discussion on caps on liability or insurances, but in the fringes. At that moment, the dispute on whether who done it, that stops. The shame takes over. And what I feel with dispute boards, especially if you apply them correctly, so from the get-go, have them involved in the project from the beginning, when the relationship is still good, they start to become a source of authority. What they say is actually listened to. What they say, to a certain extent, is also very, if you would see it very disrespectful, it's a cheap way of learning what a judge would say for way more money. Because that's one of the things that came out of that King's College report, is that very often very, very often the decisions of the dispute boards are upheld. And of course, you're truly the litigator and the arbitrator and the dispute board expert here. I don't know whether that is also your experience, but that study definitely supported me in my expectation that this is a very good way to resolve issues, prevent issues.
But you think even for collaborative approach, do you think some sort of DAB or
Yes.
DRB would be the best approach?
And what the approach that we're taking in that FIDIC model is that we're also enabling the DAB to also provide informal support. So not just formal support, but get them in early on. And not just when there is a dispute, but allow them to already identify potential disputes or potential issues. These people are not crazy. They see things.
Of course.
They have seen everything. Let them walk around the project, let them see potential disputes and let them then resolve it. We need to get them in, just like I feel we should get in litigators, but from a contract management perspective, way earlier than when everything has already been gone wrong. Make the issue smaller, not bigger. If we're talking about delay, we can have a discussion on a month delay, but if we just leave it unattended, we can also have a discussion on a year delay. In one case, it doesn't, make the problem smaller, not bigger.
So about maybe you can get a bit technical on ECI, because I've been asked a lot about what is ECI. Of course, there is some specific situation. You already touched upon it a little bit when you said about the no-go decision and the transition between pre-construction and construction.
Yeah.
And that is, let's say, the critical part of ECI. How do you keep one contractor during the pre-construction stage properly
Motivated?
Yeah, motivated, and let's say there's a distrust that in this part when you transfer the no-go decision, and you said, but maybe the owner and the contractor may have a way out without blaming each other. One thing that I'm asked a lot, and it's a hard thing to decide, is that way out for the owner is not really a way out, because they have no other option to bring to the table. What do you say to that kind of question?
So this is a problem that cannot be perfectly resolved. I believe that nearly every problem can be perfectly resolved. This is not one of them. And I have this discussion on every ECI project that I negotiate with parties who are not used to ECI. The employer thinks, hey, I want to have competitive tension. How do I know that the contractor is now not just, just pushing in their rates? Just, trying
somehow, maybe
somehow.
in the numbers, maybe in the quantities.
We doesn't have the risk anymore of me walking away, way less risk, hiking up the price. That is what an employer may fear. A contractor may fear, hey, I'm giving all my smart ideas. How do I know that the employer is not taking them, saying, oh, no go,
See ya,
and going back to the market and trying to get this for cheaper? Those are very legitimate fears at both ends. Not academically tried and tested. This is the expert opinion of a couple of clients I have, Dutch contracting authorities who have been adopting ECI over the last couple of years on a wide basis. Their experience is that if you compare the price development of a linear project compared to a project with ECI, once you enter into the construction phase, the figure in the contract, so the contract sum for the construction phase, in a linear contract will be considerably lower than the amount that you add in your construction contract with the ECI contract. So you think, oh no, it's indeed more expensive. But if you then look at what eventually leaves the pocket of the employer, there are way more variations in a linear approach because the contractor hasn't looked at the project before. It hasn't verified the budget, etc., etc. And quite often, contractors look at the contract, a linear contract during procurement, and say, hey, here's some room for extra money, there's room for extra money, etc. So I don't take that into account with my bid because clearly the employer does not want me to take it into account in my bid. I believe that contractors merely respond to the contract that you give them and try to give you an as competitive offer as possible because that is what you want from them if you focus your procurement on price. So what these parties see at the end of the construction phase is that actually the amount they spend is quite similar. But the quality of the asset that has used ECI tends to be better than and there tends to be less disputes, less time overrun. There was also some research being done that was done a couple of years ago by Boston Consulting Group, which was in the form of a case study of 18 different projects. They came out with way larger improvements in time and money, depending on the sector that they were in. There is also some research done by the OECD that also looks at a form of ECI that also seems to have a positive financial impact. So there is quite some research being done which seems to suggest that if you look at the money that eventually leaves the pocket, it's not that more expensive, and perhaps it's not even more expensive.
But you still don't see some sort of other arrangement that may substitute the way out? I mean, because you can maybe have a DAP or someone to say, of course, not to decide a price, but to decide on based on some core principle.
So this is very interesting. So I told you that we created two versions of that ECI model, the one in 2020 and one in 2025. In the 2020 version, we have an extensive 1.5-page arrangement on how you negotiate price, how you develop the price at the end, how you negotiate the term of exclusivity, and what happens if you don't agree with each other. If you don't agree with each other, in the original draft, we said, then you go to an expert. You ask the expert what the expert thinks, and then that is a go, no go. That's a take it or leave it for both parties. Because you can't impose that amount on any of the parties. You can't tell a contractor, hey, you need to do it for less. You can't tell the employer, hey, I don't care that you don't have the money in your budget. Deal with it. But what we ended up finding after 5 years, speaking with employers and contractors, is that expert was actually never used, with the exception of situations where the relationship with the contractor was so distraught already that it used that as a way to create leverage by saying, hey, do you want to have more delay? Let's find that expert. Let's have that conversation. Add a couple of months. So we only saw it actually being abused. So we took it out in the 2025 version. And we said, it is up to the contractor to convince the employer to continue. The contractor knows the employer will also have pain if he doesn't continue. But we need to have a go, no go, and to allow the employer to execute a go, no go. We are also saying, IP rights, copyrights, etc. Go to the to the employer. The employer pays hourly rates typically for the involvement of the contractor. The contractor is paid for its involvement. He gets a chance to convince the employer. Don't make it too ridiculous, and you get the job. And if you can't convince them, then you can't convince them. That's it. There is no perfect solution where you have and I've tried, I must say, on many
some people
projects.
talk about a bit of the open book, some sort of approach there, in which, of course, it depends on how much the employer can really dialogue with the real problems that come up.
In your experience, I've seen sometimes when owners or employers go to an EPC lump sum kind of contract or more a kind of alliance contract, many times they are doing so because they are not fully staffed.
Yeah.
And they know that the project's not mature enough.
Yeah.
So, or they'll try to transfer the risk to the market, which is a huge risk.
Yeah.
Or get somebody on board to help them to develop the project. But once you get ECI, once you have ECI, you must have the capacity as the owner to check the estimates. To you talked about the joint decision making, but the asset will still be the owner's asset at the end. So are you seeing owners with enough capacity to deal with this kind of projects or approaches on the ECI side and leading the process, or leaving more to the contractor?
Again, an excellent question. You guys only have excellent questions, of course, of course. But what I said earlier is there are a couple of indicators, again, not academically researched, but what we see in our best practice, which will indicate whether ECI will be successful or not. The two main things are, first of all, do parties speak about price from the beginning, or is it something only discussed at the end? That's a huge indicator. And the second is, how actively does the employer participate? If the employer does not have these resources and also does not engage them externally, I mean, then you can't. You need to voice what you want. I've seen projects taking place with effectively just the contractor and the engineer. And if you tell them, resolve a technical issue, they will resolve it, but they will resolve it gold-plated and everything on top of it. And then you'll have a discussion on budget. You need to be involved. And one of the issues that we then have, because then I'll tell the contractor, but why didn't you ask the employer to sit in on those meetings? Why didn't you demand it? Yeah, but that's not the relationship. So that is one of the reasons why I ended up adding in my contracts explicit obligations for the employer to be in the room, to make decisions. You can't do it without. But then a question that we shouldn't raise, but actually a question that we should raise is, if as an employer, you want to transfer a project too early, too immature to the market, you want to have lowest price, and you don't have the capacity, should you want to do that project? If you can't give adequate compensation for risks. The question is whether you should want that project. But that's politically not a good question to raise.
Everybody wants a free lunch, right?
Yes.
That's the problem.
That's the thing, That's the thing.
That happens a lot in Brazil, right?
Oh, yeah. Andrea, we have a special moment now, which is the behind the scenes. We want to know some story, a funny story that you were being involved in your career. That was, I know this is maybe you were not expecting this question, but
that's part of it.
Everyone passed through this.
Everybody wants to
Everyone. The question is how nasty I can be.
No, it can be nasty.
Yeah, it can be nasty.
Exactly.
Brazilian audience is
they
flexible.
Okay. So, I try to be a reasonable person. Famous last words. I try to be it. But sometimes, if I'm very reactive. So if I have an opposing counsel, who, is just negotiating with me on content, etc., we'll get somewhere. But if I have a counterparty who is continuously screaming, "Oh, deal breaker, blah blah blah," and there are no deal breakers unless you're seriously breaching the law. There are no deal breakers. Everything can be resolved. So once you have the party on the other side starting to scream that, especially lawyers, I'm like, come on. So then it starts to get fun. So I once had a solar project, and on the other, so I was working with my client, a contractor who I at that moment had been advising for already for ages. And on the other side was a party I also knew for quite a while, but that is somewhat different setup. So they ended up with a joint venture, and I ended up as only lawyers sitting in negotiations with about 5, 6, 7, 8 lawyers on the other side, screaming and shouting. But none of them knew the content of these contracts. None of them was a construction lawyer. And that was very good firm on the other side. And they were screaming and shouting, saying, "Oh, this is not market practice. That's not market practice." Hey, if market practice is your argument, I can play that game. So then then I go into content, and they can't respond to that, etc. So in the end, I managed to somehow negotiate topics which I felt were not in line with market practice, but just because they couldn't explain. They couldn't explain that, and although I agree with them, hey, if this is how you did, then I will also. And what it ended up that at a certain moment, their own legal counsel told them, their lawyer, "You're off the job." I ended up finalizing the contract with their legal counsel, and I continuously asked them, "Are you still lawyered up or not?" Because then I need to involve that other lawyer, so I continuously check that. The second deal, they were my client.
Oh, yeah.
So, a very nasty story, but...
Not so nasty. I was expecting a bit more nastiness. When you talk with the Brazilian about nastiness, we can do nasty.
Okay.
But it's an interesting story. Yeah, I also hate when you have counsels that think that, especially when they take it too personal, right?
Yeah, come
because
on,
you're
yes.
in so many negotiations. Okay, go ahead, do your show, right, Victor?
Yeah.
Show off for your boss.
Not Victor, no, Victor is Victor's more a litigator.
Yes.
Very strong litigator. Yeah.
Although I must say, I've also encountered some litigators negotiating contracts where I felt, hey, we are speaking about content.
Yeah.
So, sometimes people can really pleasantly surprise you.
Yeah, sure, because maybe some like like lawyers, counsels that tend to go too much into benchmarks,
Yes.
and they get stuck on that.
Yeah.
And some fresh few can come and say, "That's not a big deal. I can deal with that if I litigate with this later." Right? Yeah, that's good.
Oh, yeah.
And what about cases that you have like the most, that you're more proud of having participating on cases that were very important for you? Do you remember some?
Yeah, there are so many, that is like asking which one of your babies is your favorite baby.
It's hard. Usually are not even the
Maybe an
biggest
interesting
one.
one. An interesting one. I have to say the one.
It's the ones, especially where I go to foreign country, where I manage to convince local parties, let's look at this differently. And where you see that switch. I had a project like that in the Baltics. Was negotiating with two contractors. One actually was quite cooperative, etc. But I had a feeling you're not giving enough pushback. I need more pushback. Are you truly reading the contract? The other one, pages and pages and pages worth of what they don't agree with. With them, we had some very lengthy negotiations, discussions, conversations, explaining, having conversations one-on-one with the lawyer, and that's where we started to create rapport. And actually them, pushing back like that, but also us, having that conversation and changing contract, ended up in them actually getting a vote of confidence of the client. Mm-hmm. Hey, they were investing in this. They were looking at this. And that was the first time, one of the first times, if not the first time, that FIDIC in that specific country was being negotiated. And collaborative, especially.
You had to...
Everything together. And we had local counsel also. And that just worked, and seeing how that then comes together, and seeing how we also have a rapport with the clients. Everything combined. It was, but all my projects are
very important.
Are very important to me.
Do you remember when it clicked for you that the approach needed to be changed, and then it kind of drove you for that all collaborative approach? Do you remember that?
I think the first.
How do you feel that? How? Tell me a bit about.
I think the first real project was a project, and my patron will remember this project as well. It was a project that came in while he was on a sabbatical, and I was the one that was like, deal with it. And I was like, trying to phone him. Oh no, his phone fell in the Mediterranean. Oh, and I need to do it myself. That was a healthcare project in the northern part of Holland. And I ended up, creating something which I still feel could have worked. But he came back from a sabbatical, was like, nice try, let's do this differently. And we ended up doing that differently. And what was the amazing part of that was ECI, because there was also an ECI project. It can be related to optimizations, but equally important is the learning curve of the contractor, allowing the contractor to learn what you want. And in that specific case, we had one contractor who needed to build, concrete, and we had a supplier of machinery, and that needed to fit. And if that didn't fit perfectly, then a lot of money was burned. So there we created a process of about half a year, which was completely geared towards effectively the contractor understanding what the supplier needed. Of course, we also said that it was also to optimize design, etc. But the key element there was to ensure that it would be done right the first time around. So that was a key element. That was what I think one of the starting points where I started to think about it. And when it really clicked was when I was doing a large factory in the southern part of Holland, where we created linear contracts, etc. But this factory, the health and safety requirements of our client were number one priority. 0 concessions were given to that. Did not matter how much money was spent. Safety of the workers, safety of the employees, safety of the users of what was being produced in that factory. That was by far number one importance. Second point was sustainability, and after that came price. So they were very clear on that. And during the construction phase, what we noticed is that contractor did not understand the level of precision that was needed. They would make windows, etc., with like a little ridge of a millimeter. That's a millimeter that can collect dust. All of that needed to be redone. All of that. So my initial discussions with the client were, hey, I think they made a mistake, insurances, litigation, etc., etc. The whole typical blame because they did something wrong. And the client said no, because we need to get it right, etc., and we'll only bankrupt them. And I must say, it also definitely helped that the contractor acknowledged that they made a mistake. Their director ended up crying. He was crying in front of our client, and our client just, how harsh can you be in such a case? So what we did is we ended up terminating the existing contract, build a new ECI phase for the redoing of all of the ridges, etc. And after that, have a construction contract. And that went smooth. No budget overruns, no delays anymore. It restored the relationship between, and that is when I thought, hey, ECI is actually even a dispute resolution tool.
Yeah, dispute avoidance, right?
Yeah, definitely.
One thing that sometimes I understand is a key aspect that I would like to hear from you is like a behavioral kind of selection of contractors, especially if you have to work with different contractors. And do you discuss that with your clients in terms of course, this is not a legal only aspect, but because we are more familiar with this kind of ECI approaches than they are, their procurement team who asks things like that. And I would usually recommend some sort of behavioral approach of selection. How do you see that? How do you approach that kind of question?
As always, I agree with you, Leonardo. One of my fellow partners who focuses on public and private procurement, he tends to say, actually the contract doesn't matter that much as long as you have the right partner. I have seen absolutely horrendous PPP projects, absolutely horrendous PPP contracts in Holland still being a success because both parties said, and from procurement law that's not entirely allowed, but they said, we're ignoring the contract, we're doing what is right. We're finding solutions together. The right team if they have enough mandate, if they find each other, they can bridge issues. And my goal with these contracts is that we don't need the team to say, oh, let's put the contract aside, but that we use the contract to enable them to already do the good thing from the get-go. It is absolutely key that you find the right partner. And you don't find the right partner by only looking at price. You need to look at behavior aspect. You need to look at things like perhaps team assessments, views on certain policies, collaboration plans.
And not only the entities, right? Who is the person who is going to be seated with you, trying to innovate in terms of design with you? Mm-hmm. Can you speak with that person?
Yes.
How is that?
And not the seller, not the designer, but also the contractor.
Yeah.
That person needs to be involved. And at the same time, you need to acknowledge that people will go on holiday, people will get sick, people will find other jobs, people will get pregnant, blah, 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 blah. So how do you then deal with the follow-up? How do you onboard new people? How do you jointly decide who will be on the party? And what do you do if we're working together and we all see, hey, one person is being an issue? How do you then address the removal of that person? Because they're not fitting within the dynamics here. They are better suited for other projects.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, I'm taking the opportunity to make many questions, but there's the one that sometimes we don't agree as much, which is no blame.
Yeah.
Victor also has a lot of issues, right, Victor, with no blame. And I would like to see your view on no blame. What is the issue for you, and what is like, how do you see that kind of provision working out, and what does not work out? What is maybe to some situation might work out?
So the first question is, what is your definition of a no blame clause?
That's a good point. There can be different extensions of what no blame means.
Yeah.
If you look into a very joint allocation risk contract, like in alliances, they'll say that there is no point in allocating a joint risk to a group that want to work together. And then I start to picking on each of the parties' job to see if they did right.
Yeah.
Because we all have to pay off the result in the gain-paying share mechanism. That's one approach. Yeah. Another approach is when you have a multi-party contract. And I don't want, for example, if the four of us are doing a job and you are the owner, you don't want me to blame any of them. I might discuss with you, but I need a no blame discussion, a clause to say I'm not going to go after André because he made a mistake. Yeah. That's the two more usual clauses that I can see working out.
The latter, I like the latter. That is one of the reasons why we also went for a bilateral approach. From the perspective, hey, if you as a subcontractor feel that the employer did something wrong, you need to go through the contractor. Follow the right routes. There you have the protections. That's why these contracts need to flow correctly together. You don't want to have an employer directly going to a subcontractor either. No, follow the lines of the contracts and allow the lines of the contracts to be used. But then in any case, you have your insurance protection, you have your caps and liability protections, etc. So I like that flow. Otherwise, it becomes this open-ended terra incognita. We don't know what's then suddenly happening, because are we basing it on tort? Are we basing it on something else? What's the framework that qualifies with that? I don't know whether I've ever seen a alliance contracting with a true no blame clause.
Haven't. I'm good.
There is, in any case, always an exception for gross negligence, willful intent, fraud.
There's exceptions, of course.
So then it's already not a no blame clause in the pure sense of the word.
Because blame is not willful.
Yeah.
Blame is something that you don't decide on. My page was a bit about like what is like the exception for no blame, which is kind of situation where there's a act of some sort of distrust.
Yeah.
Lack of good faith, we would say. But of course, the point is, sometimes I see people arguing a bit about no blame, but I can see very clear situation in which they make a lot of sense, which is joint risk allocation. And the other situation in multi-party contracts, it happened in FAC1 here in Brazil. David and I would discuss a bit. He would not want for a while and say, no, maybe, but the client wanted because, and it made a lot of sense. They didn't want like the other contractors to be discussing among each other, which was the point. And in that situation, because it was FAC1 with only an upside sharing. Yeah. There was no downside sharing.
Okay.
There are a lot of sense to say, doesn't matter who makes a mistake here. It's only a bonus. It's only a bonus. You didn't have the bonus up front. So.
When it comes to liability, and that's also always what I ask my clients is, what do you want to achieve with liability? If you have a sword of Damocles above someone, it means it does something to their behavior. It makes them scared. If you combine that with no caps on liability, etc., it makes them very risk averse. If you have a very complex project where you cannot deal with a risk averse contractor, you need to think about that. Typically, I won't do that in the form of no blame clauses, but I will do that in the form of low caps on liabilities. And what I nowadays nearly always include is early warning obligations. Also early warning for mistakes that you have made, mistakes that others have made, combined with the obligation of all the other involved parties to help. And I think that if you would combine that, so that approach of, okay, but something's going wrong, I now need to help, with a no blame, I think that if you would apply that in practice, it will actually end up quite often somewhere near each other.
Great.
We want to know a little bit the new trends on these types of contracts. What do you see for the future also of collaborative contracts? You see there improvement of the use, or how do you see the moment and for the future as well?
So we were discussing trends. So the trend in Holland now is that for some parties, ECI is the standard. So our gas grid connector, they will apply ECI unless there are reasons not to apply ECI. So
in Australia, it happened a bit of the same. I mean, they had the benchmark was a collaborative approach.
Yeah, and what we're now seeing is that there. So what I saw originally is that a lot of engineers were like, "Oh no, we can't do collaborative contracting because then the contractor will be doing my work." Well, actually, because the employer needs so much more support, the role of the engineer is becoming way more that of a collaboration leader almost. They're way more the glue in a project. Yes, of course, the contractor is also doing work, but who is the one actually managing everything? That's the engineer. So I'm seeing a shift in the development of capacity, experiences on the side of project managers, contract managers, engineers towards a collaborative approach. And what I'm seeing is that there is a new generation of talent hitting the market who do not want to work in a traditional approach anymore, who want to work in a collaborative approach. And I'm also seeing people who used to work in a linear approach who are also saying, I don't want to do that anymore. It's not good for my business. I can do it. I can be absolutely horrible to other parties, but I don't want it. It's not good for me. It's not good for my business. Not good for my personnel. So that is a trend that I'm seeing, is that it's becoming more and more mainstream. It's in Holland, absolutely mainstream. And I'm seeing increasingly that outside of Holland, it's also becoming more considered or even mainstream.
In UK, you can see that they're starting to have that.
And there was the NEC contracts, especially, that's of course very, very collaborative. But also countries like Iceland, where it's becoming now more and more mainstream. And that is what I expect pretty much with, every country. Because otherwise, contractors will at a certain moment simply leave. What I heard during a conference earlier this year is that, for instance, Peru has been adopting NEC, and you guys will know that way
Yeah,
better.
that's true.
There are contractors saying, hey, we were never interested in Peru, but we've now opened an office there because that pipeline is interesting to us. They are creating more competitive tension for themselves. Well, what's not to love?
And what do you say to those owners who are inclined to adopt some sort of collaborative approach, but they're not yet decided that how do you usually approach them in terms of trying to
Baby
show them
steps. Don't go for the 2.0. Baby steps. Start small. Don't expect to do it perfectly collaborative, alliancing or open book. Don't do that. Small steps. If even it is just starting with a DRB. If even that's already a collaborative step. Baby steps, that's already exceeding expectations. You need to exceed
we
expectations.
agree a lot,
Oh, you always
It's exactly
agree a
the
lot.
same thing that I
Isn't
said.
that why
I said
you invited me?
there's a menu of collaboration tools. What do you want?
Exactly, and don't do everything at once. Create it. And what I also tell them is create pipelines and show that you are evolving. Tell the market, hey, play game with me, play ball with me, and I will go more and more collaborative. Show them, there's something to win.
And there's another thing to say is that if you look into a long-term strategy of forming your contractors, your suppliers, making them more adapted to your culture, this is the kind of approach that makes a lot of sense, right?
Industry learning is absolutely key. You need to invest in that. You cannot expect contractors who you have trained to have a very traditional approach to contract management to change overnight.
As if you can discard them after
Exactly.
a $5 billion contract. Well, Andrea, we took a lot of your time, and I would love to thank you. I can't thank you enough because we always have the best conversations, and
We agree a lot.
we agree a lot. In name of IBDiC, and I would love to thank you for your kindness, for being here and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to speak for 1.5 hours about myself.
It was a pleasure to have you here. Hope that you can come back and give a little bit more of your experience and it was great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a real masterclass. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
E com isso, pessoal, nós encerramos aqui o segundo episódio do Conexão IBDiC. Agora você já sabe, todo mês, Conexão IBDiC trazendo grandes especialistas aqui para debater os grandes assuntos do direito na construção. Então você pode seguir no YouTube, no Spotify, você pode comentar os episódios diretamente nas plataformas ou então nas redes sociais do IBDiC. E fique ligado, sempre que sair um próximo episódio, a gente conta com você também em espalhar a notícia, em passar, compartilhar esses episódios com seus colaboradores, com seus pares, porque assim esse projeto segue crescendo. E a gente espera vocês aqui no próximo episódio.